When I called my son David to wish him a happy 20th anniversary, his voice on the other end of the line went thin and tight. There was a pause there, one of those empty spaces that tells you more than words ever could. "Thanks, Dad," he said, the sound strained. "But you're a little late. The anniversary was last month." I leaned against the kitchen counter, my own breath catching in my chest. I looked at the calendar hanging on the wall, a simple thing from the local hardware store. A big red circle was drawn around today's date, October 15th. I'd marked it myself. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sure it's today. Your mother and I were there. St. Martin's Church. It was a beautiful day." Another silence. Then his wife Jessica's voice murmured in the background, sharp and impatient. David cleared his throat. We renewed our vows, Dad. In Hawaii. It was just a small thing, really. Last minute. With Jessica's family." Last minute. Of course. A last-minute trip across the Pacific Ocean with her family. But not a single word to me. The excuse was so flimsy, so careless, it was more insulting than the truth would have been. The truth was, I wasn't wanted there. I closed my eyes, and the image in my mind wasn't of a beach in Hawaii, but of the ever-widening gap between my world and theirs. My world was a small brick house in a quiet part of Denver, where the sound of a saw was more common than the hum of a German luxury car. Their world was a sprawling mansion in Cherry Hills Village, a place of manicured lawns and silent automatic sprinklers that came on at dusk. A place where a father who smelled of sawdust and wood varnish didn't quite fit the decor. I mumbled something about how nice that must have been, a hollow courtesy that tasted like ash in my mouth. We hung up, and the silence in my kitchen was deafening. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon. Through the window, I could see the first heavy, wet flakes of the season's snow beginning to fall, clinging to the bare branches of the oak tree I'd planted the year David was born. The cold outside felt like it was seeping right through the glass, through the walls, and settling deep inside my bones. For years, I had made excuses for them. David was busy building his finance empire. My daughter, Sarah, was occupied with her husband's medical career and raising her two perfect children. Their lives were complicated, important. My life was simple. I was a carpenter, a cabinet maker, to be precise. I'd spent 45 years in my workshop, a place of order and creation, where a steady hand and an honest eye were all that mattered. My wife Eleanor had always been the bridge between my world and the one my children were so eager to join. She understood both. She had grown up simple like me, but she had a grace that allowed her to navigate any room, any conversation. When she died 12 years ago from cancer, the bridge collapsed. I just hadn't been willing to admit it until now. After her passing, the calls from the kids became less frequent. The visits grew shorter, punctuated by glances at their phones. Their invitations to my home stopped altogether, replaced by awkward, duty-bound invitations to theirs, usually for a holiday meal, where I'd sit at the far end of a polished mahogany table that was 3 times longer than my own. I remember one Christmas, a few years back, at Sarah's house. Her husband Mark was holding court, talking about a recent medical conference in Switzerland. My grandson, who was about 10 at the time, asked me what I did. I told him I built things out of wood. He looked at me confused and asked me, "Like with Legos?" Everyone at the table laughed, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach their eyes. Sarah just smiled tightly, and changed the subject. I felt like a ghost at the feast, a relic from a past they were actively trying to forget.
These stories take days to craft, but only seconds to support. Please like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Back to the story.
In the spare bedroom, pushed against the far wall, sat two large, ornate chests, one of walnut, one of cedar. I'd started building them the day I found out Eleanor was pregnant with David. I finished the second one just before Sarah was born. They were my masterpieces, each one taking nearly a year to complete. The joinery was seamless, the carvings intricate. They weren't just boxes, they were meant to be a tangible record of my love. Inside each, I'd placed things from their childhoods, their first shoes, a lock of hair from their first haircut, drawings they'd made in school, report cards, photographs. Eleanor had added to the collection over the years. They were meant to be their final inheritance, the story of where they came from. I had the keys to the small inlaid locks tucked away in my desk drawer. I always imagined giving them the keys after I was gone, a final gift from their father. Now, as I stood in the doorway looking at them, they just seemed like two beautiful, lonely coffins, filled with memories that no one else wanted. That phone call about the anniversary, it was a switch. It flipped something deep inside me. The dull ache of disappointment I'd lived with for years sharpened into a cold, clear sense of purpose. Denial is a comfortable old coat, but it's a heavy one, and I suddenly felt the need to shrug it off. I went down to the basement, to the old metal filing cabinet where I kept decades of paperwork. I wasn't an angry man. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was just looking for the truth. I pulled out the files, the ones marked David and Sarah. I sat there for hours under the single bare bulb, the smell of dust and old paper filling the air. And I started to read. Page after page, it was all there, in black and white. The tuition payments for the University of Denver, 4 years for each of them. I'd cashed in my own retirement savings to make sure they graduated without a penny of debt. The down payment for Sarah's first condo, $30,000, a gift. The down payment for David and Jessica's first house, $50,000. And then I found it. The paperwork for the loan I'd given David 10 years ago to start his investment firm. $150,000. It was a formal loan, drafted by a lawyer, with a modest interest rate. He'd made 3 payments, then called me one night talking about cash flow problems. He'd asked if I could defer for a few months. I'd said yes, of course. The months had turned into a decade. I'd never brought it up. I'd told myself he was my son, and it was a father's job to help. Now, seeing the signed document, I realized it wasn't a forgotten loan. It was a calculated write-off in his mind. He'd gotten the money and simply moved on, assuming I would be too proud or intimidated to ever ask for it back. He was right. Until now. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that made everything click into its final, heartbreaking place, wasn't in the filing cabinet. It was on my phone. I scrolled back through months of text messages, looking for something I had dismissed at the time. It was a message from Sarah, sent about 6 months ago. I had thought it was a mistake, a message meant for someone else. Now I knew it had been meant for her brother. It read, "We can't have Dad at the hospital fundraiser. Mark's boss will be there. He'll just end up talking about wood shavings and varnish. It's too awkward. He'll just end up talking about wood." The very craft that had paid for her education, her wedding, the roof over her head. The work of my hands, my father's hands, and his father's before him, reduced to a social inconvenience, an embarrassment. That was it. That was the moment the ground beneath my feet finally settled. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest. But it wasn't a helpless grief anymore. It was the grief of a man who finally understood the landscape. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the quiet street in a thick layer of white. It was time to make a plan. The next morning, I called George. George and I had been friends for 50 years, since we were kids playing stickball in this very neighborhood. He'd become a lawyer, a good one, but he'd never left his roots. He still lived 3 blocks away in a house just like mine. I asked him if he had time for coffee. He said, "For you, Art, always." We met at an old diner on Colfax Avenue, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called you Hun. The smell of bacon and coffee hung in the air, a comforting aroma from a simpler time. And I didn't waste any time. I laid it all out on the table. The missed anniversary, the loan, the text message. I pushed the file folder with the loan documents across the table.
George listened patiently, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. He was a calm, steady man, and his silence was a sign of respect. When I finished, he looked at the paperwork, then back at me. His eyes, usually full of a wry humor, were serious. "Art," he said softly, "what do you want to do?" "I want to change my will," I said. My voice was firm, without a tremor. "I want to change everything." I explained that my house, my savings, the workshop I still owned over on Broadway, it was worth a fair bit, more than my kids knew. They saw an old man in a small house, not the assets he'd quietly accumulated over a lifetime of careful work and frugal living. "I don't want to leave it to them, George, not anymore. They've already received their inheritance. They just got it in advance." A slow smile spread across George's face. "An advance, I like that. So what's the new plan?" "I want to set up a foundation," I said, the idea taking full shape as I spoke the words aloud. "The Eleanor Paris Foundation for Young Artisans. It will give scholarships to kids who want to go to trade school, kids who want to learn to work with their hands, welders, mechanics, electricians, carpenters." George nodded, his eyes lighting up. "That's a legacy, Art, a real one." "As for the loan," I continued, tapping the folder, "I want to formally call it in, all of it, principal and accrued interest. It's a legal document." He signed it. "It's ironclad," George confirmed, flipping through the pages, "and with 10 years of interest, it's going to be a substantial number. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I looked out the diner window at the snow-dusted city. "The fallout already happened, George. I just didn't see it. This is just cleaning up afterwards." The next few weeks were a blur of activity, but it was a focused, energizing kind of work. I spent hours with George in his quiet, book-lined office. We went through every financial record I had, dating back 30 years. We were like archaeologists, unearthing the story of my life, told through receipts and bank statements. We calculated the exact value of every check written for tuition, every gift for a down payment, every dollar I'd poured into their lives to give them the launch I never had. The final tally was shocking, even to me. It came to over $850,000, not including the loan to David. It was a number that represented countless early mornings, late nights, and hands that were permanently calloused and stained. George handled the legal architecture, drafting the paperwork for the foundation, retitling the assets, and preparing the formal demand letter for the loan. My job was simpler, but in a way more difficult. I went to the bank and opened a new account for the foundation. I met with an accountant to structure everything properly. Each step felt like laying a new, solid foundation, not of a house, but of the rest of my life. During this time, I didn't hear from David or Sarah. No follow-up call, no text message. It was as if our last awkward conversation had been a door they were happy to close. The silence only confirmed I was on the right path. The hardest part was dealing with the two chests. For days, I just looked at them. They were the last bastion of the father I used to be, the one who held on to a dream of a grateful, loving family. One afternoon, I finally walked into the room, a roll of bubble wrap and packing tape in my hands. I unlocked each one. The faint scent of cedar and old paper filled the air. I looked at the contents, the tiny bronzed shoes, the faded construction paper drawings of stick figure families holding hands under a smiling sun. I thought I would feel a wave of sadness, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were looking at the artifacts of a life that belonged to someone else. I carefully removed a few items from each chest, a single photograph of each child with their mother, one of their early drawings, and a small silver locket of Eleanor's that I had given to Sarah. I placed these few things in a small box. Then I closed the lids on the chests and locked them for the last time. I wrapped them carefully in the bubble wrap, protecting the wood I had spent so much time sanding and polishing. I called an auction house that specialized in fine furniture. The man who came to appraise them was impressed. He ran his hand over the carved walnut, his eyes tracing the lines of the joinery. He gave me a valuation that was more than I expected. The proceeds, I told him, would be the first official donation to the Eleanor Paris Foundation.
With all the pieces in place, it was time. I sent a simple, identical text message to both David and Sarah. I need to see you both. I'm discussing my final arrangements and need you here. Please come to the house this Sunday at 2 p.m. It's important. The phrase, final arrangements, was deliberate. It was the kind of language that even the busiest of children could not ignore. They both replied within minutes, confirming they would be there. That Sunday, I woke up early. The house was quiet. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the winter sun glint off the fresh snow. I felt calm, centered. This wasn't about revenge. I knew that in my heart. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was about balance. It was about correcting a ledger that had been ignored for too long. At precisely 2 o'clock, 2 expensive SUVs pulled up to the curb outside my little brick house. They looked like spaceships that had landed in the wrong neighborhood. David and Jessica got out of one, Sarah and Mark out of the other. They walked up the shoveled path I had cleared that morning, their expressions a mixture of impatience and dutiful concern. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said, stepping back. They shuffled into my small living room, bringing a gust of cold air with them. They looked awkward, out of place, their expensive wool coats and leather boots a stark contrast to my simple furniture. In the middle of the room, on the coffee table, I had placed 2 thick, leather-bound ledgers. Next to them was the small box containing the few keepsakes I had saved. "Dad, is everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with the rarest sympathy. Jessica's eyes were already scanning the room, as if appraising its contents. "I'm fine," I said, motioning for them to sit on the sofa. "Thank you for coming. I know you're all very busy." I remained standing. I wanted to be on my feet for this. "I told you I wanted to discuss my final arrangements, and I meant it. I've made some decisions, and I wanted to tell you about them in person." I saw a flicker of something in David's eyes. Greed, maybe. Or perhaps just relief that the awkward business of inheritance was finally being addressed. I've spent the last few weeks doing a lot of thinking and a lot of accounting. I've realized that I've been managing my estate all wrong. You see, I always thought of an inheritance as something you get when your parents are gone. But I was mistaken. I've already given you yours. I picked up the 2 ledgers from the table. I handed one to David, the other to Sarah. "I believe you will find these are in order. I've compiled a complete record of what I call your inheritance in advance. It details every major financial contribution I've made to your adult lives. The tuition, the down payments, the gifts. Everything is in there with dates and amounts." They opened the books. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of turning pages. I watched their faces. Confusion turned to disbelief, then to a dark, flushing anger. They were seeing their lives laid out not as a series of achievements, but as a list of subsidies. "What is this, Dad?" David finally said, his voice low and dangerous. He tossed the ledger onto the coffee table. "Are you trying to bill us for raising us?" "No, David," I said calmly. "I'm not. Everything in that ledger I gave freely, as a gift. It was an investment in your future, one I was happy to make. But gifts are a two-way street. They require a little acknowledgement, a little respect. Instead, I've been made to feel like an inconvenience, an embarrassment." I looked at Sarah, like someone who shouldn't be at a fundraiser because he might talk about wood. Sarah's face went pale. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "So, I've made a new plan. My remaining assets, this house, the workshop, my savings, are being placed into a trust. It will fund a foundation named after your mother. It will provide scholarships for young people who want to learn a trade. It will go to people who value the work of their hands." David stood up, his face a mask of fury. "You can't be serious, Dad, after everything we've done." "What have you done, David?" I cut him off, my voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel he hadn't heard in years. "You have forgotten anniversaries. You have ignored loans. You have treated me like a distant, slightly embarrassing relative you have to check on once a year. That's what you've done. And speaking of loans, this is a formal demand for repayment of the $150,000 I lent you 10 years ago, plus the contractually obligated interest. George tells me the total is now just over $247,000. It's a legally binding contract. I expect the first payment within 30 days.
Jessica gasped. Mark just stared, speechless. David looked as if I had physically struck him. "As for the rest," I said, picking up the small box, "this is for you." I opened it and showed them the contents, the photos, the drawings. "These are the things that matter. These are the memories. The rest of your childhood belongings, including the 2 chests I built for you, have been consigned to an auction house. The proceeds are the Foundation's first seed money. For a long moment, nobody moved. The reality of the situation was sinking in, displacing the arrogant certainty they had walked in with. It was Sarah who finally broke. A tear traced a path down her cheek. "Dad, I didn't mean for—" "I know what you meant, Sarah," I said, my voice softening just a little. "You just didn't think I'd hear it. There's a difference." I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold afternoon air rushed in. "I think it's time for you all to go. This is not a negotiation. It's a notification." David took a step toward me, his finger jabbing the air. "You'll regret this. You'll be all alone, you old man." "I've been alone for years, son," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "The only difference is, now I've stopped pretending I'm not." They left. I watched them walk down the path, their shoulders slumped. They didn't look like powerful, successful people anymore. They looked like what they were, 2 children who had been called to account for their choices. I closed the door, and the click of the latch echoed in the sudden, peaceful quiet of my home. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction from their pain, just a profound, cleansing sense of release. The boundary line had been drawn. The door had been closed. I had finally reclaimed my own life. 6 months passed. The winter snows melted, and a warm Denver spring arrived, coaxing green shoots from the cold ground. The foundation was officially up and running. The auction had been a success, and David's first loan payment had arrived, grudgingly through his lawyer. My workshop, once a solitary space, was now filled with new energy. I had taken on the Foundation's first scholarship recipient as an apprentice. Her name was Maria, a bright, eager 20-year-old with a real talent for seeing the potential hidden inside a rough piece of lumber. I was teaching her, but in truth, I was learning just as much from her. Her optimism, her gratitude for the opportunity. It was a balm to my soul. It reminded me of why I had fallen in love with my craft in the first place. The work was honest. You couldn't lie to a piece of wood. It demanded respect. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was a simple cream-colored envelope, and the return address was Sarah's. My first instinct was to throw it away, but I didn't. I opened it with the same hand I used to guide a chisel. The letter inside was short, written in her familiar, flowing script. It wasn't a demand or a justification. It was just an apology. She wrote about how my actions had forced her and Mark to have long, difficult conversations. She said she had started volunteering at a local food bank. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even ask for forgiveness. She just ended the letter with the words, "I hope you are well, Dad." I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it on my workbench. I didn't know what the future held for me and my children. Maybe, in time, a new kind of bridge could be built, a smaller one perhaps, built on a more honest foundation. Or maybe not. Some things once broken can't be perfectly repaired. But for the first time, I felt at peace with that uncertainty. Maria called me over to look at the dovetail joint she was cutting for a small maple box. It was clean, tight, a perfect fit. A smile touched my lips. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and showed her how to feel the grain, to listen to what the wood wanted to become. Tomorrow, we'd open the workshop at 7 and get back to work.
If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your comments mean more to me than you know. I read every single one. And if you'd like to hear the next story of hope and justice, just click the box that's about to appear on screen. Thank you for spending this time with me.